CDR. For anyone that has not been to a CDR before, it is an, I suppose, maybe event series, is that the right thing to say? It's been running for about 20 years, and it is an amazing opportunity to hear from all different kinds of artists about their processes, their insights, their inspirations, and to have a look inside, behind the veil, exactly. My name's Lizzie. I work for a non-profit in Bristol called Saffron, and I'm delighted to be here with Saracen.
Hi. Yeah, the microphone.
Yes, I was very excited when I got asked to do this with Saracen, aka Felix. Thanks for having us, CDR, and thanks Arts Council for funding it. Okay, so we're going to have a chat for about an hour. We're going to talk about kind of Felix's origin story, where she came from, how she ended up here, and have a look into some music. So, first of all, I would like to ask you, Felix, to maybe self-describe who you are as an artist, your overall vibe. Give us maybe some keywords.
Ooh. I don't know, these kind of things are always really hard because I'm trying to sort of defy categorization a little bit. But I guess I'm a predominantly musical artist. I work in composition, production, instrumentation. And a lot of the themes in the work are about kind of queering a sort of classical music background and bringing in elements of my lived experience and memories growing up as a queer kid, being trans, and also a bit of my experience with synaesthesia, and kind of like melting textures and colors together into these sort of cacophonous pieces. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's talk then about this backstory. Tell us a bit about where you grew up. What was the vibe like?
So I grew up in Exeter, which actually isn't very far from here. It's a fairly small city. It was a very cute place to grow up. It was fine. My friends that I kind of went to high school with there, I'm still friends with now, which is really cool. And I started learning piano when I was 5. I was in a very musical family, which it definitely plays a big part in what I'm doing now. Sort of my dad was listening to contemporary classical, very intense Messiaen, Penderecki, all of that kind of stuff, and Tom Waits, and then my mum's listening to Kate Bush and Cyndi Lauper and all this 80s stuff. So I think there's elements of both of those in what I'm doing now, which is really fun. I started playing the tenor horn when I was about 8. I was playing in a children's orchestra for a bit, and then left when I was no longer a child. I think you have to leave at 16, maybe? And then actually didn't touch it again until I moved to Bristol when I was 22, I think, which is quite funny. Grew up in Exeter, stayed there for a while, but there wasn't really a queer scene there. It didn't feel that kind of exciting a place to be in musically. I was friends with some DJs by the time I got into college, into the kind of free party scene, which was interesting, and it was around 2010 or 2012 when Disclosure were getting really big as well, so everyone was kind of obsessing over deep house, and that's when I started actually kind of making distinct tracks, I think, because I'd been playing around on GarageBand for years but not really doing anything worthwhile. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, your kind of musical family heritage sounds quite interesting, and quite lucky to have grown up with some actually very interesting and cool stuff around you. And then getting older, then some more electronic stuff and clubby stuff. Did kind of starting to produce, did that just happen naturally, or was there something that you
I think because I was always musically inclined, I just really enjoyed kind of doing anything wherever I could. We got our first family Mac when I was maybe 12 or 13, which has GarageBand on it, and so I was kind of really drawn to that and kind of playing around with the arrangement window and sort of loading in samples and things. But yeah, didn't even really consider that that's how professionals were making music. I just sort of imagined that it was like you go into a recording studio and you do things, like, which obviously is traditional. And then, yeah, kind of when I got into college, met people who were actually making kind of house tracks and putting them on SoundCloud, and I was like, oh, I've actually been doing that for a while. Maybe we can kind of make something a bit more substantial from that. So yeah, I started making a bit more purpose-built tracks rather than kind of just pop covers.
Right. Okay, nice. It's a great way to kind of learn how production works, is by copying.
Totally,
something that's
yeah.
already done, right?
I was really, really obsessed with making these pop covers for ages, which is a really good way to kind of like discover all the ins and outs of a program, I guess, because I was doing it on GarageBand, which is super limited. But if the goal is to make a track sound as similar to kind of the proper version as possible, and all you've got to work in is GarageBand, then it forces you to find kind of other ways of doing things and ways to sort of like break the software a little bit to get the result that you want. So I think that was really, really formative in how I kind of make music now, definitely.
So when did you then start actually sharing your music publicly, and were you always Saracen, or did you have another kind of alias before?
Oh my God, I had so many. I think when I got into college, I started kind of putting things on SoundCloud, and it was like edits of like Knife Party and all these like dubstep bits and bobs. And I was using, I think one of the first pseudonyms I was using was Enough, but with an F instead of a G. I have no idea where that came from. Like, it was very that kind of Tumblr era. And then Kalpa, which is like a Sanskrit word, because I thought I was that girl. And then Robert Young as well. This was in the era where, like, just before I came out as trans, I say just before, maybe like 7 or so years before. I was like trying desperately to sort of mask up, and all of the techno producers at the time had really boring names. It's like Ben Clock and like Marcel Detman. It's just their names. So I was like, I need a name that sounds like a man. So I chose Robert Young, which is really, really dull, but it worked perfectly. It's exactly the kind of thing that I was looking for.
Okay, so I know that you have been digging around in the archives a little bit for some early music,
Yeah.
Which is actually amazing that you've agreed to play some of this. Before we play it, tell us what it is, and was this as Saracen or was this under a different? Who was this?
No, so this was all under like a much earlier pseudonym. There's someone here which is just Felix. This was literally when I was a teenager making little like random bits and bobs, and then some of them are under Kalpa, which was the name that I actually had a release under when I was 17, with Infinite Machine, weirdly, who now are like really, really big, but at the time they weren't very well known, and they picked up a snippet that I put on SoundCloud, which I didn't have a full track for, and they were like, we'd love to release this, and I was like, let me just send over the full thing, totally have it, and I absolutely didn't. So I had to very quickly make something and then put it up, and it's fairly bad. But they still released it, so hey. So maybe we play one of the earlier ones first. I'm trying to think what would be funny. Oh. So this one. This was like, yeah, me trying to do as much as I could on GarageBand. else happens after that, but
But I can hear you're exploring your like harmonic language there.
totally, and also humor as well is like still quite a big part of my work, which is quite important. So I think, definitely playing into that still.
Love that.
Yeah. So that's something I made. But yeah, I was very into disco. I was really into Daft Punk for most of my childhood. So kind of doing something really disco-y was what I wanted to be doing for a really long time. And like the way that they kind of like cut up samples from other songs, I was really interested in kind of decoding and finding all of the sort of the origins of those samples and trying to create my own things. There's another one which is actually like made in the same style as Daft Punk, using those like cut up samples. I think it was a track by the Brothers Johnson, but it's literally just samples cut up. Fun. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really nice to actually kind of see what came before a little bit and hear what came before. Okay, so how did you go from that then to what we now know as Saracen? What happened in between? Did you have to leave Exeter for Saracen to...
Yeah, so I left Exeter when I was 18, I think. I did 3 years in college and dropped out twice, which was a lot of fun. And yeah, all my friends were going to London for uni, and I didn't really want to go to uni, but I wanted to stay with my friends. So I moved to London as well and just got a job, which was fine. I was there for about 3 years, but it's so expensive. It was really just like impossible to... In that time, I didn't really make any music because I was like working 50 hours a week to barely scrape by, and all my friends are like on student loans, just having the time of their lives. And that was not me. So yeah, there's like a gap in my CV between Exeter and Bristol where I didn't have the capacity to be making anything, but I think in that time I was having my sort of queer awakening. Finally meeting a lot of like gender non-conforming people, a lot of other queer people for the first time in my life, and really kind of immersing myself fully in the club scene, which like just doesn't exist in Exeter at all. So that was really, really edifying in lots of ways, and that's when I... Excuse me. It's the Coca-Cola! That's when I got more into DJing as well, because it was the perfect kind of environment, because it was like house parties all the time, and I had a pair of decks with me as well from the DBS college that I had just been at for a year before. So yeah.
Okay, so you were kind of working hard in London while everyone else was studenting, and then what brought you to Bristol?
Actually, my friend Carmen was like, she'd been living here since my 3rd year of college, but she was moving into a warehouse, and the famous, we know how this goes, she was like, we need another person to make it like down to a certain price so that we can live there and like super cheap. It was fine for a short while, and then it quickly became incredibly unpleasant. But I mean, it was like 10 people living in a windowless warehouse in like bedrooms that are kind of 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, in very close proximity to each other, who maybe shouldn't have been so close. But moving to Bristol, like just being in Bristol, I instantly fell into a really cool group of people who were like doing the kind of music that I was interested in, doing something like really kind of fresh that I hadn't encountered before. People like Alex Tolosa from Planet Fun was one of the first people I met when I moved to Bristol, which is so lucky because we're really, really good friends still now. But they also got me like my first kind of gigs. like before Planet Fun was a thing, they were doing this Peggy Vianetta night at the Arnolfini, which was my first like Saracen gig. And I just did, because I didn't have any of my own music at that point, because I'd just come from London. I just did a 40-minute DJ set and like lip-synced to the whole thing. Like in the style of one of my live shows, which I knew I wanted to be doing, but I didn't have my own music for it. So I was like, okay, cool, let's just play around, see what kind of things happen performatively.
So Saracen kind of came into existence before the original music did, so you had to kind of...
Yeah, much before. It was actually like, initially it was more considered like a drag project, not so much by me, but like that's how people saw it, I think, because it was like lip syncing and dressing up and like DJing rather than actually kind of performing and doing live music. And I guess in the setting of Bristol as well, there's such a big drag scene here, and I was like making friends with them as well, so it makes sense to be in that context as a sort of like cabaret performer rather than anything else. But I definitely wanted to move more into kind of music specifically and performance.
So then the music that we now know as Saracen, for me anyway, doesn't instantly kind of, I'm like, how did it happen? Because I guess if you were doing kind of like lip-syncing DJ sets, but then this kind of very out there kind of inverse sort of classical stuff and abrasiveness, and how did you get to that?
I think that's the sort of stuff I was listening to, and like in the DJ sets, it was a lot of that kind of things as well. I was playing like opera music and playing kind of like noise stuff and soundtrack pieces as well. So it was a real kind of eclectic mix of things that embodied like the scope of what I wanted to be doing. So knowing that I could like play that kind of stuff in one show together was really like the spark that was like, okay, cool, I can actually like spend time making the exact kind of music that feels authentic for me, and it's going to be received well, mostly.
So then I know then you started using Logic, which is your DAW of choice for now, shall we say? Tell us about those early Logic days.
Yeah, I mean, I went to DBS in Plymouth while I was still living in Exeter for a year, and they taught on Logic, but I was still on GarageBand, and I was actually really like, I didn't want to move to Logic from GarageBand because I'd made such like a good home in GarageBand, knowing like my limits and where I could kind of tweak things and play with stuff. And I think now I've reached the same kind of point where I'm like, I really like Logic because I know exactly like how to do all these kind of bits and where all the kind of, the nooks and the crannies are. But yeah, I moved over to Logic, sort of had to. It works really well for production for me because I think maybe it's because of my history with GarageBand, but it also, I think, in terms of like classical music, it makes a lot more sense as well because the arrange window is much more like a music score, which is what I was used to reading and writing music when I was younger. But it doesn't work so well for live, which is the problem I'm running into now.
Yes, okay. We will talk more about live in a bit, but I think perhaps shall we have a little watch and listen to, is it your first release of Saracen, which I think was a remix you did?
Yes, right? With the video?
Yes.
Cool. The things that I have. So, there's an artist who was based in Cardiff, but is now based in Liverpool, I think, called Mogan, or Moganism. He's really, really good, and they invited me to do a remix of one of their tracks. And then during lockdown, everyone was doing these sort of like digital drag shows, so I made a music video for it, for one of these sort of cloud rave situations. Literally just me running around the woods with a GoPro, which was really fun.
I'll be fine.
Oh my God, so good.
It's so funny.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack. I want to talk about visuals and I want to talk about the sound and everything, but okay, first of all, let's talk about the actual music. Mm-hmm. So it was a remix. How much of that was original source material that you'd messed around with, and how much were you like, actually, I'm just going to add my own new sounds?
So all of the vocals were from the original, but it's so different. Like, it was a really slow building kind of I don't know, it was kind of like tape loopy sort of thing, like really, really dark and pretty like melancholic and a bit ominous and very quiet, with this sort of vocal thing going over and over and over. And I was trying to see how far I could push the vocals, so they're in a granular synth and they're like pitch shifted and they're stretched out. That whole middle section is just from like 3 seconds of vocals, that really, really long bit, just super, super stretched, and then repitched to make these kind of different harmonies. And then obviously there's like this clubby element with the kicks going through, and then something orchestral with the strings as well, but they're auto-tuned, so there's a little bit of like something weird going on.
Okay, amazing. So then the video itself, what I think I love is that I suppose this was like your first official release as Saracen, and even though it's a remix off your own back, you're like, right, I'm going to make a video, and so therefore straight away you're kind of laying out your artistic intent, that you're not just releasing tracks, you've got all this other stuff going on, and it's really getting a kind of aesthetic out there.
Aesthetic warning. Yeah.
Was that always like, your intention to be like, I'm not just here behind a screen making music, I'm...
Definitely. Yeah, I think also because like, for a while when I was a kid, I really wanted to be like an actor and like a drama kid. So I think that there's an element of me kind of like fulfilling that through it as well. And yeah, just was always very into kind of performing. So I always wanted it to be, the visuals are a really important element of the music as well, because of the kind of synaesthesia element of it. It really makes sense for there to be some kind of like visual anchoring so that people kind of get the whole universe of it. Yeah,
so how does your synaesthesia, like how does that kind of manifest?
So like hearing sounds often like triggers kind of colors and textures somewhere behind my eyes. I'm not completely sure where, but it's this sort of like chroma textural landscape situation, sort of like cracking open and lots of like, I don't know, physical textures like manifesting as sounds, I think. Yeah.
Right, so there isn't really then a separation between like the audio and the kind of visual, and it's all part of this same world. I would love to talk about maybe like if there was a turning point, or maybe more than one turning point of being like, oh no, Saracen is like, this is what I do now. Like,
I think there's been a couple. I think like, getting my first gig as Saracen was like a real sort of, this is something that I can do and actually make money from. Which is wild when it's like, it's something creative that you're really kind of personally attached to, and it's not something you ever considered making money from. And then you're like, oh, actually, this is a new situation for me to navigate, which is a good and a bad thing, of course. And then I guess the other big one was the Saffron grant, of course. Like, I applied for some funding from Saffron a few years ago, and was really, really lucky to get it. And it came with mentoring and like this really, really incredible program that like my album wouldn't exist without. So thank you very much, Saffron. yeah, that was huge. Just being able to give myself the time and the space to make an album, because like, again, I've been working at IKEA. I finally managed to leave, but I was working there for 5 years, like as soon as I moved to Bristol. So it's finding time alongside that and like not feeling like you're wasting time, not getting paid for something. So yeah, that really kind of set the stage for what was to come. And then another one recently was that Acne show, which was insanely huge, a massive surprise.
Very much so, and actually I'd love to watch a bit of the Acne show, but yeah, I feel like for me, having kind of, as you mentioned with the Saffron Grant, followed your journey for quite a while, I remember when you gave up the IKEA job, that was a big moment.
Yeah.
So the Acne show, so Acne, for anyone that doesn't know, fashion brand.
Yeah, Acne Studios. It's a Swedish label which was founded in 1996 by Johnny Johansson, I think, who's a really lovely guy. And yeah, they're a kind of luxury brand that deal in a lot of it's usually very like plain square architectural kind of things, which is why I was really surprised that they asked me, but then I saw the collection and it all made sense.
So what did they actually ask you to do? Was this like your first kind of big like kind of commission type piece?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I'd done bits and bobs of music for runway shows before, because a friend in Paris had been doing runway shows for his brand, which like was relatively small. But I'd been sort of, we'd been working together for about 4 seasons, I think, just going through the collection and kind of like we'd make a playlist and figure out what kind of theme it was, and it was usually very 80s, which was quite fun because that's not something I would ever make otherwise. So it was really cool to kind of like explore those really like warm, kind of squishy synths. But this was like a completely different thing where they wanted like super specific moments of like bespoke music and like all these particular elements within the collection to like show through the music, which I think was a really good fit for me because of my experience like translating textures into sounds, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, should we have a look?
Let's have a look. Just going through all my files. This is horribly dangerous. Where is it? This one. And you'll notice I've actually used the same drum pattern as from the track before.
Very flipping cool, especially kind of early on in your career to have something like that going on, and it
So
just,
wild.
but it feels like it was, as you say, like a very good match actually all round. Okay, so let's talk about the album. Again, I guess something kind of fairly early in a career to lay out a first solo album, perhaps.
Yeah, without doing any singles or EPs
Yep.
before, it was a slightly bigger task than I anticipated, but I did it.
Well, tell us then. We're gonna get into actually dissecting some of the music from the album. I wonder if you would like to do that first, or if you would like to talk a bit about that kind of personal, emotional journey of creating an entire album.
Yeah, let's talk about that first, I guess. I mean, oh my God, this Coke. I think I wanted to make an album as my first kind of statement, I guess, because I grew up listening, like I love CDs, I grew up listening to an album the whole way through, and like still now if an album comes out, I'll like sit down with it and listen to it from front to back, because there's like intention in the order of the tracks, and there's like often a narrative with things, which I'm really interested in, creating a kind of story and this narrative element that goes through. It was a really interesting experience, because I've not had a time in my life when I can devote so much time, like concentrated time, to music making. So usually my process is really, really slow, and things are just kind of like, they're not judged by any kind of deadline. It's just like, oh, if something happens, then we'll run with it. If not, then we'll leave it. But in this case, it was like, we have like marks to hit. We have like 9 tracks to make. So we have to kind of roll through. And some of them were done in like a day. The first track, Ancient Dildo Intro, was literally like, started at maybe midday and was finished by 4. The whole track done, which I was like, oh, this is going to be a breeze. And then the second track, Tonsil Bells, took 8 months. So yeah, it was a really interesting and not easy process at all, because as well as like actually physically having to kind of write and produce, and the whole thing was me. I don't think I wanted any help on it, because
and it was still quite COVID-y then as well when you were...
Yeah, it was 2021?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was like there wasn't a lot of... We were still sort of in and out of lockdown every now and then, and it was really sort of a bit all over the place. So only one of the tracks was made in a studio, and the rest were all just done in my bedroom.
Right. Yeah. And the title of the album?
The Horgenaith.
The Horgenaith.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Is that something tied into like a concept for the album, or...?
Kind of, yeah. So it's actually a misheard lyric from a Tom Waits track. The track Cemetery Polka, which I think is track 2 or 3 on Rain Dogs, has a line that says, independent as a hog on ice. But the way that he says it in the like gruff, really hog on ice voice, I as a child, I thought it was some kind of mythical beast. So a lot of the themes in the album are kind of about giving my inner child a voice. So I thought it'd be nice to kind of link something back to my actual childhood. And also there's a lot of things in there about kind of like misheard sounds and sort of fragments of things. So it made sense to use this like misheard lyric. But it also does sound like this kind of beast with like, I think maybe for me it sounded like the word Argonauts from Jason and the Argonauts, and there's the Hydra in that, which really terrified me as a kid. So yeah, I think it was probably that connection.
Okay, wicked. So you made most of it at home using Logic, and what other tools are at your disposal?
Well, obviously the lovely Daxophone here, which is an instrument that I made with Jemima Coulter, who's also an incredible musician. Check them out. It was invented by this guy called Hans Reichel in the 80s. He's a guitar player and a font maker, but weirdly made this super bizarre instrument. It's got like a piece of wood on the top, which you bow directly like on the wood, and then the sound reverberates inside the box. And yeah, it makes a really bizarre and kind of horrible noise, but I love it. And then obviously the tenor horn, which is the same one I had when I was a teenager and child. When I moved to Bristol, I found it in my mum's loft and was like, we can do something with this. This is going to be really interesting. Also because, actually, maybe I'm going to like out my whole career here, but there's a track on Bon Iver's album, 22 A Million, where he plays a saxophone through that vocoder thing that he uses. I was like, oh, this sounds really cool, I got to try it. And now I've kind of built a career on doing that. But I've also, like, I've done something else with it as well, so I don't feel too... Yeah, and then also bizarrely, I actually don't use that many non-Logic plugins. I think, again, because of the whole kind of GarageBand thing, I'm very into using what I have to the nth degree. There's a reverb and a distortion from D16 which I use, and there's a texture patch thing which I use on the Daxophone, and that's pretty much it.
So keeping it simple in terms of like the tech side. So maybe now's a good time to actually walk us through a project file.
Yeah, totally.
I think, are we doing Tonsil Pearl?
Yes.
Okay.
Seeing as it's the the kind of magnum opus. Let's open that one. And it is super simple. It's like a lot of just audio recordings of things.
What mic were you using actually to do all your? Sorry.
So, I actually turn that down. So for vocals, I was just using one of these actually, a Shure SM58 or 57.
Yeah.
And the same for the horn, because I didn't really have a ton of equipment yet.
Mm-hmm.
I did spend some of the funding on some overhead mics, which I actually then used for a film soundtrack, the choir thing that I did. And yeah, just playing the horn into the microphone directly, which isn't a great way to record brass. If you're ever thinking about it, don't do that. But it sounds fine on the album. And then the Daxophone has two piezo mics like glued to the top of the box inside, so it can oh, there you go. Yeah, so you can register that. Yeah, it's very minimal in terms of equipment as well. It's really just like one or two mics. And it is literally like individual tracks of just these noises. Like all of these ones are from the Daxophone. Several layers, and then there's a bunch of these brass ones. To go through the whole thing, or to like pick apart as we go? What's better for people?
I mean, maybe we should hear a bit of it.
Yeah.
And then
go back.
Yeah, I think. Okay, talk us through it. So, yeah, you can see the way that I've built it as well. Like it starts all up here, and as the track progresses, everything moves down and slowly gets lower and lower and lower. So it is really this kind of like linear. In some cases, this linear stage of like adding things, adding layers as you go, depending on what feels like right at the time. It's very like, it's an instinctive process once the writing is done, but the writing is really maybe a bit more kind of, a bit more traditional, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I try and approach each track the way that it kind of needs to be approached. So sometimes that's like
in a very linear way, starting with composition and kind of moving through, or it could be like creating a bunch of audio recordings and then playing around with them and like working as a whole, like placing things and then sort of like rearranging things. But yeah, with this one it was a very long process of just going through front to back. What should we look into?
Okay, so we've just
So
it's lots of Daxophone.
Yeah, so
off.
these bits are all the horns.
Okay.
It's all just like, each one is just one recording, and then I once I had the timings of one, I recorded the rest, listening to that. And then, for the bass, actually, I used a Daxophone sample and retuned it, because you can get the right note sometimes, but it's a little bit unpredictable, shall we say. So it was actually a case of, stretching, trying to play one note, and then reshifting the pitch. By, you can see it's on...
Sounds kind of foghorny.
Yeah, very. It's like, so what the noise is a lot higher, but then I've slowed it down. See here, if you go into flex, you can change the way that it stretches things. So if you have it on monophonic, for example, it works best with like a sound that's just one note. Or if you put it on speed, it goes into just like speeding up and slowing down, changing the pitch. So I stretched it until it was the right note, which is a bit of a long way to work, but it also makes one of the clearest sounds, because just by repitching things you get all these glitches sometimes. But yeah, it's this really kind of like deep wail.
Yeah. And I guess the beautiful thing is it's kind of, although it is like one pitch, it's still kind of evolving.
Definitely. I think that's what I really like as well. Using real audio samples means that you get all these strange little like bits that go slightly out of tune, like it's not perfect at all, and the sound comes in and out, and you get these weird, kind of like organic glitches almost.
I was going to say organic. I was like, I can't say organic.
No, I use that word way too much. Yeah.
Okay, and then vocals, vocals are all you, is that right?
Yeah, it's all me. So it was, I had this vocal line. And then kind of wanted these like, in operas you get kind of all the background characters saying the same things as them, but just like when someone's like, I'm in love, and they're like, she's in love, like all of that kind of thing. I really wanted that that kind of element to it, which I think is really fun. So they just kind of repeat what I'm saying. Like it's really like an operetta or something. It's so fun. Yeah. And
beautiful.
Then, thank you.
Did lyrics come first, or did you have
lyrics?
Okay.
I've had this song written for so long, but like. The lyrics aren't really in any kind of structure that revealed itself as a song immediately. It was kind of just like diary scribblings of just like, the experience that I was going through. And then, it was really a case of just like doing it, just recording it and seeing what kind of, I had the chord structure in place already, so it was, trying just like saying the words in a pitch that like reveals itself as you go along kind of. And then obviously there's this huge like blasting noise. It's kind of going through the whole thing. Yeah, you can hear it a little bit. It's actually one of the cardboard compactors at IKEA. And I recorded it on my phone, but the quality is really good. It's crazy. Yeah, I think there's a filter. Oh my god, look at this EQ. This is chaotic. So that's, yeah, I think I put a high end because I wanted it to be a little crisp, but I didn't want the kind of the mids really kind of bulging through. I just wanted the bass. And then here you can see it shift. This is super intense. That's some glass. Yeah. It's a lot of like recordings from IKEA actually. This was me throwing away some glass in the glass bin. But yeah, there's that reverb that I was talking about. This D16 one. It's really, really good.
And is this still like your go-to?
Easily. Yeah, Tour reverb. It's the one. Everyone talks about Valhalla Room. I haven't tried it yet, so maybe I'll be a convert, but I'm also like, this is like, it's so good. You can do so much stuff on it. And also like, I mean, you can probably do the same on Valhalla Room, but you can make it not even sound like a reverb. It just sounds kind of like it just slows the attack a little bit if you have the reverb really short and have it on full. Yeah, so it's just a case of kind of arranging these really arrhythmic sections into something that sort of feels a bit like a beat at times, and then like moves in and out of that. Yeah, and then what should we look at next?
What's the string curve sound like?
In the vocal, this bit. So this is one of the best. This is why I love Logic, because it has sculpture. Now, sculpture, cool. Oh my god, everything is called that. Is it that one? Yeah. Yeah, so it's this amazing synth where you can choose a material. Is that big enough? Can you see it? I'll make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Yeah, you can choose a material. This box in the middle has nylon, wood, steel, and glass, which obviously appeals to me greatly. And you can move this around, and it changes the kind of... It's so cool. And then you can... This one is like... It's just like infinite fun. And then there's all these effects you can put on it as well. Yeah, it's great. It's so cute.
Those notes are beautiful. I could listen to that over
It's
and over.
lovely, isn't it? I was really trying to do like something that felt a bit medieval. So it's kind of based on these. There's a lot of particular harmonies they used in like choral and string music, which are really, really limited because they wrote the notes on the sections of their fingers, and that's how they showed each other melodies, by like pointing to certain bits, and you remember the hand pattern, which shows you the right notes.
Right.
So cool. But then also there's this pitch bend thing, which makes it a little bit kind of futuristic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wicked.
Mm.
Okay, and then, right, should we keep going through? Because there's lots of other
Yeah, totally. I mean,
sounds.
yeah, there's so much. If we go into the main section, this bit. So the kick, I don't think I actually have the original synth, which is really annoying, but I just did it on an FM synth. It was actually one of the easiest bits. I was really, one of the things that stumped me with this track for so long was how to make the right kind of kick. And then it was actually one of the easiest things in the end. If I just open up, where is it? FM synth. So FM synthesis, it can be really confusing, but to know about it really well and to do exactly what you want. But if you're just kind of messing around, it's a lot of fun. It's where all the like deep house synths come from mostly. But if if I boom, boom, boom. Yeah, if you can do all these like super weird things with it. Oh, there we go. That's a little bit closer to the sound of the kick. Yeah, it's a bit like that. Different note, but yeah. So it's actually like super simple in the end, which was a relief. But then all the rest of the percussion is actually made from my mouth, which is hilarious because I don't consider myself a beatboxer at all. But maybe I am.
Can we hear some of that in isolation?
So actually, wait, if I do this one. If I turn that up. Literally me going like... But yeah, with this texture patch on that I use as well, so it literally just puts a white noise over the top, so it sounds a little bit less like a mouth and a bit more like a drum. Yeah, just like a little bit of EQ to get the highs up. Again, I don't think I have the original snare sample, but I think it was like a kick and like a and you just put them together. And then the really fun thing is granular synthesis. So you can load a sample into a granular synth and it kind of picks it apart by what it calls grains. So you can choose the size of the grain and you can basically like stretch out a single moment infinitely. It's such a cool tool, and there's a lot you can do with it. And you can kind of like glitch back and through the sound. So yeah, that's where you get all the like flippy bits. Yeah, so the percussion ended up being really dense in this part because there's so many layers of things going on, and there's also this vocal thing, which is made from some recordings I did under a tunnel with some friends. So we just like sang random notes for about 10 minutes, and then it's like sections of that stretched and kind of like. Yeah, through granular synth as well. Get into it. It's so good.
I've also, Felix, I did just look at the time, and the last half an hour has gone. So it's like basically almost 9 o'clock. So we might have to skip over a few other bits we were going to do. But I would love to find time for us to actually hear some live Daxophone.
Yeah, totally.
And horn, seeing as you went back to get your mouthpiece.
It would be a shame. Okay, yeah, totally. Let's do that. If I open up, not that. Let's go into swallow. Nope. It was there.
Yeah, I feel like, to be honest, we could have probably spent the whole session just dissecting that track,
it's
actually.
so big. There's so much happening. Even, I was going back through it today to kind of prepare a bit. I was like, Jesus, I forgot about all of this. It's so dense.
So, yeah, we're going to hear a bit of actual live instrumentation. And maybe, whilst doing that, tell us a bit about how you go about translating the recorded music to the live show. Or is it not even about translating?
Yeah, the translation process kind of isn't there, because when I'm writing and thinking of the tracks, when they first appear as ideas, performance is the first thing that they exist as in my mind. Whether it's kind of this synaesthetic performance of colors and things, or whether it's actually me thinking about how I'm gonna make this authentic, realistic experience into a show. That kind of happens first, and then it's about how to make that in Logic so that I can do a performance with it. So it's almost like a reverse process in that kind of way, which is quite fun. Let's have a look. So, you'll see it makes a really horrible noise. like a whale, and also a bit like a foghorn, and also like at times with this distortion it sounds almost like the sea. So the track we ended up using it for mostly was this track Swallow, which is about being eaten by a whale. And you can hear the texture patches. So that's the sound of it normally. That's with the texture patches on, so you can add like a kind of sub-harmonic. It takes the sound and creates like something however many octaves lower you want. And yeah, it's this super, super rich bass. Which just sounds so good. I'm like obsessed with it still. It's one of my favorite ones to do live as well, because everyone loses their mind. And then so most of the elements of the track, except the vocals, are put through the same bus, which is where you put lots of tracks into the same kind of effects pedal, basically. And the kick is in there as well, so whenever there's a kick, the Daxophone kind of distorts under it, so they kind of combine into this real huge crunch. Not that. So that's the kick by itself. So nice. Oh. And also, hilariously, those really low noises that like... That's a burp. It was a burp that my boyfriend Johnny did while we were recording, and we were like, we have to use that. It sounds so good. It's these like stomachy noises. So good. So yeah, that's the Daxophone. I really want to kind of explore it a bit more, because all I've really been doing with it is playing Swallow now, because I've been touring and playing gigs for the best part of a year. But I'm gonna like go chrysalis mode a little bit in the summer, and try and see if I can like do something a bit more melodic with it. I think it would be really cool to try and explore that side a bit more. But yeah, should we try the horn quickly? Don't save. The amount of times I'm like, yeah, you can do this, and like mess around with all of this stuff, and I don't, and then I save it. I'm like, oh, I've just lost so much stuff.
While that's all loading, there's a question that I do really want to ask, kind of unrelated. But who are some artists that you maybe have seen live? Like, who makes you want to kind of run home and make music straight away and like be better? And who makes you feel that?
That's a really good question, actually. I mean, I think one of the earliest ones was Arca, who I saw when I lived in London, and it was like one of the most insane live performances I've ever seen. Like, obviously she had those huge like stilts, and there were costume changes, and she had this like, she played the track Whip, which is like a lot of really well-placed whip sound effects or like recordings. But she played it with this like full, like the whole place went black, and there was a huge projection of someone getting fisted. It like, but perfectly in time. It was edited like to the, it's like, and that was just like one of the most incredible audiovisual moments I've ever witnessed in my life. So I was like, wow, damn girl. You fucking did that. Yeah, Arca was a really big one. But also, I don't know, seeing lots of different performers inspires me to perform in different ways, I think. Like, I did a series of gigs last year with Leia, who, one of them plays the harp and one of them plays the violin, and they sing. It's very, very kind of neoclassical, not really electronic at all. But seeing the way that they actually interact with their instruments, and seeing the way that they perform in a very kind of classical way, but making music that is so not classical, because it's all detuned and it's a little bit like kind of bathed in reverb. So it's seeing a range of people, I think, especially with the range of music that I am interested in making. It helps to see lots of different, like even punk bands, like seeing the way people are kind of rolling on the floor and like yeah, screaming. It inspires something.
You can just mash it all together in your own special way. Okay, so let's hear some horn, please. And you say it's the tenor horn, which is that different to a French horn?
Yeah, so a French horn is round.
Yeah.
This is in the same family as like the tuba and the see here on this channel, there's all this MIDI information, which I just played on the piano into a vocoder, and then when you play anything over the top, you can even sing into it, and it like remaps the audio to those notes.
Is there something else you wanted to play, or should we move on to questions? I mean, we have gone 5 minutes over already, and I want to give... so I wanted to give some time for, general questions, either about anything you've seen or heard this evening, or, other stuff as well. Has anyone got anything they wanted to ask Felix? It's going to be a roving microphone.
Hi. Oh yeah.
Well, hang on, we'll just get that question on mic.
So it's made by Isotope. Is Isotope the name of the? Let's open it up. It's called Vocal Synth, and Isotope are a really, really, really cool brand. They do a ton of. This is the other. Out of Logic thing that I use, but I use it to death. Because it doesn't really have like a specific sound of its own, it sort of works with whatever sound you're putting in, so you have a lot of control over what the output is, which is really nice. So you can make things sound really kind of homogeneous and to your style, depending on what you're putting into it. But it's really fun as well. I actually don't use it in enough different ways. There's a proper kind of like 90s vocoder style thing, like really Daft Punky. It's so good. Yeah, I thoroughly recommend it.
Any other cues? Yeah, over there.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering how did you still love making music when you were working so much at IKEA?
I mean, I think it was a good escape, apart from anything else, because by this point, I was pretty certain that I wanted to be making music, like, all the time, which definitely wasn't something that I knew instantly. So I think it was, like, a sort of light at the end of the tunnel thing. It was really a case of, like, I'm using so much time outside of work to make this thing happen. So I've got to make sure it happens, if that makes sense. Yeah. But it was a long struggle, because I've been working like solidly in retail since I was 16 until I was 20, 26, 27. So it's a long old slog, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. You can do it.
Thank you.
I relate a lot to the only using GarageBand thing. And I really like it because there are lots of restrictions, which is why I don't want to move from it, but I kind of know I have to. So I was wondering that when you first moved, what are restrictions that you put in that you found quite helpful?
Ooh, that's really good. I mean, I think that's partially why I started doing remixes mostly. Like the first Saracen thing I did was a remix, because that is an instant limitation. It's like you have to work with this material in some way. But again, I was kind of like, when I first started on it, I was really trying to emulate certain artists. I was really into like Daxophone at the time, and really trying to figure out how to get that sort of like, I don't know, 80s-esque, but super, super intense, like really deep and rich bass. I think if you're if you're really trying to like figure out something and you're not too worried about releasing things, it's really worth trying to emulate something really specifically to a T, so that you can like, because you learn so much on the way of getting to that point, and you can remember things for later, like, oh, this didn't work for that, but I can actually use it for this instead. Yeah.
Any other cues? Yes, Jen.
I'm just interested in like the synaesthesia and how much it informs your concept behind sort of what you do, or whether it's more of a sort of feedback or more of a feed-forward sort of process.
Ooh. I think at this point now, it sort of subconsciously informs a lot of the writing process. Like a lot of the lyrics will sort of evoke a certain image or something that fits with like the sound that I'm trying to create. So like either one will inform the other or the other way around maybe. But yeah, I think it's incredibly present in most of the things, nearly actually all of the things that I've done in some way, either by trying to create a sound that evokes a certain texture or color, or working with something until it goes the other way around. Yeah, if that makes sense. I don't know, it's weird because it's such a kind of like singular and internal experience. It's really hard to vocalize and kind of talk about, even if it's a sort of subconscious process that I work through quite frequently. It's still not something I fully understand. But yeah, we work with it.
Hey, I just wondered, I'm interested to hear more about the process of curating the Acne show and how it actually looked to kind of, like, I guess it was almost like a film score in that you're like building climaxes and like releasing tension, and I wonder if you could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it helps to think of, depending on the commission, I think it helps to think of most things with a narrative structure. And I've always wanted to get into kind of film scoring and things, so it was a chance to really kind of go in and create that. It's interesting though, because I didn't know the order of the looks this time, but they knew that they wanted kind of like peaks and troughs at certain like minutes, which I was getting kind of like spoon-fed little bits of information. And yeah, it was a lot of back and forth. The process of writing and producing it was about a month, and it was, I worked on something for 3 weeks, which they were like, yeah, this is great, keep making it longer, cool. And then like a week before the show, they were like, actually, we're gonna try a completely different direction. I was like, oh, cool, love that. But it actually ended up being really fine. And they were really, really lovely people to work with, so it was actually a pleasure. But it was, yeah, again, it's a case of like meeting each project where it wants to be met, kind of like working with something as you go, instead of going in with like, this is my process, this is how I work. Going in sort of openly and freshly to each thing. Yeah, it was interesting.
I feel like for a lot of producers, getting their music played in clubs is super important. I was wondering how important that is to you, because with me, when I produce, I like making lots of stuff that you sort of make with lots of like ballads in between, hard kicks and stuff like that, but like sometimes it doesn't translate to the club. So in what way when you produce do you go, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it depends what the point of what I'm making is. I think with like this album, for example, getting it played in a club was like nowhere in my mind at all. It was just about like getting it out and making something that was in line with how I was feeling. But then hilariously, Danny, Orderly Room, plays Swallow all the time at Strange Blue. So I'm always at the front like, yeah, it's a lot of fun. But then I also do make like some really stupid clubby stuff. Like I did that Caroline Polachek remix a few years ago that went like ridiculously viral, and it was one of the easiest things I've ever made. It was like a donk remix of So Hot You're Hurting My Feelings. But I mean, something like that is specifically for a club because it's donk music. Where else does that belong? Maybe on like a car speaker in a field somewhere, but yeah. Cool, maybe we're done.
Oh, is that a hand
Ted.
up?
yeah, this is, I guess, potentially not a quick question to answer, but saying you're gonna like go back into cocooning and like thinking about writing again, or at least like reworking some parts of what you're doing. Like, I guess just like how does that feel, and in the light of wanting to go into things and approach them for what they are, and not kind of have this like preconceived notion of what that is. I can't really like fathom thinking that I wanted to make an album before I made an album, and like coming out of COVID and you having not released stuff, I guess that was like a very specific place to be in, and now in a way there's a kind of security, and I guess imagine like a couple of different kinds of pressures as well. Like what does that look like for you right now, just like looking forward into that cocoon?
That's a really cool question. I don't know, I think because like one of the main reasons I want to go back into producing and kind of gigging a little bit less is because, like I say, the Horgenaith was entirely me. Like I wrote, recorded, produced, like made all of the samples, everything. And I kind of want to explore like my collab era a little bit. I want to kind of work with people and see what that looks like, because I've never actually really collaborated before, apart from on remixes, which isn't really, like it is a collab in a sense, but not in this way. So I want to kind of like collapse my workflow completely and just open it up to other people. I think that would be really exciting, because I've made my statement as an artist. Obviously I will have more to say, but for now I think it would be really cool to do something completely different.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
Ooh.
This is like an announcement as well. Oh my god.
Exclusive. Well, I think we probably have to leave it there for today. But yeah, massive thank you, Felix Saracen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.